Uh, just a couple of things before we get jumping into our material this morning. Just a reminder, this weekend is our teacher workshop. If you have any interest in teaching, improving your teaching, starting teaching, Bob Turner is the one Bob's going to come and do this for us. Bob is a wealth of information. He has a great approach to teaching, has a great approach to leadership, but of course his focus here will be teaching. I think I said this last time and I was going to find out and I didn't. I don't know if we have to register for this or not. Does anybody know if there's like a church teams thing or not?
There's a form they're asking you to fill out.
Yeah. Lori did send out a form that Bob asked us to fill out, just kind of a teacher experience, some thoughts you might have about teaching, but that should be in your email. Regardless, I really encourage you, if you have any interest at all, to take part in this workshop. Then, not a week from today, 2 weeks from today, Steve and Joel have set up an opportunity for us, and actually kind of whoever, but they've kind of focused on our young adult group, to go do some caroling at a couple of senior centers. Next, like I said, 2 Sundays from now, in between worship services. And then that evening will be our second Sunday supper, which is, what did we decide? Breakfast foods, cereals, casseroles, whatever you want, whatever you eat for breakfast. I'm bringing a big pot of plain oatmeal, so that'll be lovely. Spring Garden Senior Living, Senior Assisted Living first, from Foxtail. Those are both pretty close by. And like I said, Steve and Joel have set it up with them. We're not going to just show up and surprise people. So we used to do that every year, every couple years with our teenagers several years ago. And that's a lot of fun. I mean, it's fun for us, but it's so fun to watch. I mean, that's such a shot in the arm for those folks. So that will be 2 weeks from today.
Hey, Clint.
Yes.
If we're going to spend the afternoon singing, can we just, like, downgrade it to best cereals?
Sure.
Probably make it easier.
You,
There's 10 votes.
you guys are in charge. So, okay, so veto the casseroles. It's cereal. I'm all for that. Okay, so before we jump in again to start going here, let's have a word of prayer. Any particular prayer requests this morning? We probably have a lot of people traveling back home or coming to us from somewhere today, so remember all of our travelers. Anything else in particular? Okay, Tommy, if you would.
Father, we're thankful for our night of rest and for the blessings today. We're thankful for the fact that you have revealed yourself to us through your word. We ask your blessings on Clint this morning as he tells us the story of Jesus. Love that he has demonstrated to us a willingness to provide for us. And pray for those who will be traveling over these holidays. Here and come here. We ask that you open our eyes to opportunities to touch the lives of those that we come in contact with, that we might fashion ourselves in the image of your dear Son, and that as he did, we might live out doing good. Bless our study this morning. In his name we pray.
Amen. Okay, as we were wrapping up last week, we're to the point where Jesus has prayed in the garden. Judas has shown up with this giant mob, the arrest squad. Judas has kissed Jesus, and there's been that kind of tension between Jesus and Judas. Jesus calls him friend. From what the language there says, it seems that Judas is really laying on the affection pretty thick. And then, of course, Peter comes to the rescue and pulls the sword. We're gonna talk about Peter a little bit more today specifically, but in that instance with Peter drawing the sword, I thought about that some during the week, and Jesus seems to, we're going to be in Matthew 26 and John 18 primarily today. So if you want to mark both of those in some way or another, that'd be great. But Jesus seems to kind of rebuke Peter here. He says, no, enough. We're not doing this. This is not what's happening. Okay, as we get to that moment, what has Peter been doing up before the mob shows up at the garden? Sleeping. Jesus said, stay with me and pray a while. They're sleeping. He comes to them 3 times and says, can you not stay awake? They're sleeping. Then he wakes up. There's time to, he says, okay, enough. Here comes my betrayer. So Peter's groggy even at this point, you would have to guess. Pulls the sword. Maybe that explains why he just gets the dude's ear. But then Jesus again kind of rebukes Peter. Says, put it away. What's this? If you live by the sword, you die. If you die by the, whatever he says, live by the sword, die by the sword. What's Peter's mindset, you think, right now? Put yourself in his shoes. Yeah.
So I think there is like a little bit of confusion, but it's also a trusting confusion.
Yeah, and then that's kind of what I think is some confusion. Any other thoughts?
I think he's angry. I think he might be one protecting his friend.
Yeah, feeling a little defensive, feeling a little, want to be protective. Eric?
Jesus just told them all that,
Yeah.
So I think maybe he's out to prove his.
Okay, so he's wanting to bow up a little bit. Okay, so just in those 3 comments, we've had confused, ready to be defensive, ready to be protective, trusting.
He's already made a pledge, I'm going to be with you no matter what.
Yeah, he's made a big grandiose statement. I'll even die with you. So he is a mixed bag of emotions right now. I mean, he is groggy, for one thing, ready to defend Jesus, trying to trust Jesus, confused about what's happening, probably scared. I mean, just his brain is just swirling. And then in the middle of all this, twice in the last few minutes, Jesus has said, no, Peter, that's not what we're doing here. So keep that in mind. The apostles are ready to take off here. Well, they're not yet. So another question. I think we maybe talked about this. Why this secret arrest? I mean, they come to Jesus. Jesus even calls them out for it. I've been in the temple all the time. I was there today. I mean, I'm always around you. What are you doing this for? What's their answer? I mean, we don't know their answer, but why are they doing it this way, do you think? Populous? You rile the people right now. There's a lot of people to be riled. What else? When did the Watergate break-in happen? During business hours? No, you do it at night. You do those kind of things when nobody sees it. What they're doing right now is a government action that they know isn't right. And we'll talk about that in some more detail. But what they're doing, they know is not the way to do this. Jesus calls them out for it. Says, listen, I was around you guys all the time. But they also know, as Adam pointed out, you try and arrest Jesus, the guy who just came in to hearing crowds yell, Hosanna. You try and arrest him in that crowd, you could have real problems. Things could really go sideways quickly. Well, the apostles, let's look at Matthew 26. Let's start at verse 55. At that time, this is in this moment, at that time Jesus said to the crowds, have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a criminal to capture me? Every day I used to sit teaching in the temple, and you didn't arrest me. He even says, I was just sitting there. I mean, How easy is that? You could have just grabbed me, but you didn't arrest me. But all this has happened so that the writings of the prophets would be fulfilled. So Jesus says this is what's supposed to happen. The prophets have said this is what would happen. What's the next sentence? Then all the disciples take off. It seems like at this point they're finally just overwhelmed with fear, because it seems like at this point it hits them, he's really going to go with these guys. This is really happening here. This is not going to be the walk through the crowd and disappear. But we talked about this a little bit last week. Look over in John 18. Whoop, too far. John 18, verse 7 and 8. Then he asked them again, who is it that you're seeking, this crowd? Jesus of Nazareth, they said. I told you I am. We talked about that last week. What a powerful statement that was. So if you're looking for me, let these men go. This was to fulfill the words that he had said, I have not lost one of you that you have given me. Maybe it is that they heard that, and what they heard was, won't go. And then they just went, pew. Okay, this is our cue. This is our escape. It's time to get out of here. But, like I said, it's prophesied. So Jesus isn't going to go, wait, guys, stay here, stay with me. He knows this is supposed to happen. What are they afraid? What are the apostles afraid of? I mean, they're there to arrest Jesus. But what are they afraid of? Yeah, co-conspirators. And I mean, you read back through history in this day. I mean, even in the New Testament, we hear about other messiahs, guys who brought an uprising. The Romans didn't go just get, like, if Ed starts an uprising and this whole side of the room follows him, they don't just go, all right, Ed, come with it. They go, all you people, you're going. He's going, it's going to be bad for him, but you're all coming because we're not going to have this.
So you watch the old Star Trek shows, the guys in red shirts with the old, they weren't the main characters. And I wonder if that's what they're thinking, that, are we small enough that they're going to are we big enough that they're going to bring us in, or are we small enough that they're just going to kill us here?
Yeah. Yeah, what if they just wipe us out right now? I mean, that ends their problem. So maybe it is when Jesus says this, if you're going to go ahead and take me, let them go. So they hear go, but then, like I said, maybe they're also, it hits them. This is really happening. This is what's about to happen. So Jesus is left alone with this mob. And that to me is about as sad a picture as we see through this whole night. Here's this mob coming to get Jesus. He protects his guys, and he goes, so let them go. And he turns and goes, so God, and there's like a cloud of dust. I mean, because they're gone. So Jesus is alone in the garden with the mob, and they've got their man. Now, this is where things get really political. And if you look at Matthew's account, really all the gospel accounts, you have to kind of piece this together. Because Matthew tells us, well, let's look at what Matthew tells us instead of me telling you what Matthew tells us. Starting in verse 57. Those who had arrested Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had convened. Peter was following him at a distance, right to the high priest's courtyard. He went in and was sitting with the servants to see the outcome. Now, if you flip over to John 18, verse 8, no, that's what we just read, verse 13, 12 and 13, then the company of soldiers, the commander and the Jewish officials, arrested Jesus and tied him up. Another little detail. First, they led him to Annas, since he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Okay. Interesting situation here we have between what Matthew says and what John says. Matthew says they take him to Caiaphas the high priest. John says they take him first to Annas. Annas was the high priest from the year 7 to about the year 15. Some say 14. For some reason there's some ambiguity there. And John, this is one of the things, this is, when I was at school at Bear Valley, Denny Petrillo taught John and a couple other books. But Denny has a degree in Hebrew and Greek and was Mr. Let's analyze everything about it was really, really cool. But this is one of the things that he pointed out that to me is super interesting. John 18:13. What does it say about Caiaphas? He was what? High priest? That year. How long are high priests high priests? Lifetime. That almost seems like John taking a dig at the system. Because the Romans would take a high priest out and plug in their high priest. Annas was Caiaphas's father-in-law. He's not even in the lineage. It's supposed to be his sons. Now, 5 of his sons had served as high priests under him. Annas had kind of turned into Don Corleone of the high priests. I mean, he was just kind of the godfather. He ran things even when his sons were high priests. And his sons were in as high priests for a while. And then they would be removed. And then we get to Caiaphas, who's his son-in-law, who shouldn't even be high priest. But John says he's high priest that year because they're shuffling him around all the time anymore. Annas technically should have stayed as high priest. He should be the one who is... In fact, that's why the Jewish officials would go to him first. Because in their mind, the Jewish Puritan would say he's really still the high priest. Caiaphas is his puppet. And when it says that Peter went into the courtyard, the way their homes were arranged in a lot of big families, wealthy families, is you'd have a family here, a family here, and a family here, and a family, and a courtyard in between. So it seems they go to Annas first because he's the mob boss. You know, he's the one you got to report to first. So they go to Annas. And Annas has issue with Jesus already. The priesthood as a whole has an issue with Jesus already. What would be a problem that the priesthood would have with Jesus at this point? I mean, besides he says he's the Messiah and he's going to change everything. What's one of the things that we see Jesus do twice that we kind of go, ooh, wow, Jesus got a little angry there? Cast them who? The money changers. 2 times we have recorded that Jesus, in a emphatic way, throws out the money changers. What are the money changers doing? Jews would come from all over to come into Jerusalem to pay their temple tax, to do their sacrifices. Let's say the Davisons are coming from far away, and we've got our family. We've got to bring, we got to bring sheep. We got to bring some doves. I'll tell you what. Let's just buy them when we get there. That'll be much easier. Makes travel easier. That way you can fly instead of having to But that's what a lot of people did. They'd get there and they would purchase their animals. Well, if you purchase your animal at the temple, if you purchase it outside of town, you can get a good sheep for, $20. But you buy it in town, supply and demand, it's $30. And guess who's getting that excess profit? The priests are. Then, let's say you come from way down south, you're out from wherever. And your coinage, your currency is a little different. And most of you would have Roman currency because that's what you had to have in the shops and the markets and everything. But not to pay the temple tax. You have to have clean in there. It's what's called clean currency. So you would go exchange your Jewish coins or your Roman coins for Jewish coins. And there's a little fee for that. And guess who that goes to? The priesthood. So Annas and his family have developed quite the moneymaker in this exchange system. And Jesus knew it. I mean, everybody knew it. But Jesus called him out on it twice. Right there in the temple, right there in front of everybody, right there in the temple court. Said, you've made my Father's house a den of thieves. We read that and we kind of pass it and we go, wow, Jesus got angry. It's okay to get angry because it's righteous. That's not the point. The point is, he's embarrassing these people in front of everyone and saying what you're doing is sin and you know it. And he calls them on it. So there's a little bit of chip on Annas' shoulder about Jesus to begin with.
He does it in the temple too. And there's a fortress built on the corner of the temple by Herod that houses the Roman garrison. And so when we talk about Annas and Caiaphas being high priests for the year and being appointed by Rome and them doing this in the dead of night, had they done it in the temple, it would have been in front view of all the Romans.
Right.
It would be a black eye for the person who's the high priest for the people. You know, for Jesus, not only to do that, but do that in full view of the Romans, the high priest is going to get some flack, most likely from the Romans at the time. Why did you let this guy do that?
Yeah.
Because they're watching everything that's happening in the temple grounds. This is this tower that sits above the temple. They can look into the temple. It houses a temple or houses a Roman garrison. The high priest's vestments are stored in this garrison.
Yeah.
So the high priest, to do his job, has to go into this place and see the Romans and explain his actions as well, these things. So the Romans are playing, I think, a much larger part in the decisions that Caiaphas is making and the reasons why they're doing this and all.
Oh, yeah, because the Romans watch everything. And to go back to what Adam said, when Jesus turns over those tables, you think about, if you watch The Chosen, you think of whatever the guy's name is, this Roman guy. Quintus, yeah, that was snarky about everything. Imagine that guy watching that happen, and he'd go to the high priest and go, hey, you guys in control here or what? Who's this guy? You guys just let him do that? Now, if we need to step in, we will. And I mean, you look back in history, you look even in extra biblical stuff, that was Rome's attitude everywhere they were. Rome was, I mean, in a weird way, Rome was really good about letting cultures continue being their culture. But it was always, if we need to step in, we will. And you will not like it if we step in, because there will be heavy consequences. So Jesus has embarrassed this system. At this point, this in so many ways, what's happening with Jesus is a complete mockery of the entire Mosaic justice system. Israel was a theocracy. God was the ruler. God was the king. I mean, when the Jewish leaders tell Pilate, we've never had any king but Pilate, or we've never had any king but Herod, whatever they say, that's such an insult. I mean, God's their king. Their entire history has been being ruled by God. Yes, there are people that even in God's system, there are judges and officials, but they're ruling on just what God has already said. It's not, they're not supposed to be making their own laws. They're not supposed to be doing that sort of stuff. In order for this to work the way it's supposed, by this time, and I don't mean by this night, I mean by this point in history, the entire Jewish legal system is corrupt. And like I said, you can go back and look at history and see that, but it is incredibly corrupt. It's obviously with the high priest system, there's, I mean, evidence right there. But in order to try a person, and we'll get to that in a second, but in order to even try someone, to arrest someone, and I mean, even today, when you arrest somebody, if they're expected to answer questions or have to do anything, what does the legal system have to do? You read your rights, but then, I mean, you've seen it on the cop shows. The guy's sitting in the room, they're asking him questions, and he'll say, are you going to what me? Charge. If you're not going to charge me, let me go. Because until you charge me with something, I don't have to do anything. Jesus hasn't been charged with anything. And he's standing in front of the high priest tied up. There's supposed to be eyewitnesses. This in Jewish law, there's supposed to be eyewitnesses. There's supposed to be more. I mean, you know the Old Testament text. There's got to be at least 2 witnesses. They're looking for false witnesses, and it says they're looking for false witnesses. Under Jewish law, if you're a false witness, you're guilty. Your punishment is supposed to be death. And they're just bringing guys in and go, hey, make up something. Come on. Say something about this guy. And it says they're actively seeking false witnesses, which is completely against the Mosaic law. There's a rabbinical tradition you can find in the Mishnah, which is the oral history of the Jewish law. And it's a good tradition. Sometimes you look at rabbinical tradition and go, that's crazy, but this is a good one. But they had established a system at Jesus' day that before the Sanhedrin would rule on anything, they would fast for a day. Why? Why would you do that? To think about it. To make sure you're making the right, so you're not in the heat of the moment. We hate this guy, Jesus. Let's try him and convict him. Boom. But that's exactly the path they're on. They have totally disregarded all their safeguards, all of God's built-in safeguards, and even their own traditional safeguards. They're throwing all of this out, which leads to, look at 57 and 58. We already read this. Those who had arrested Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, for the scribes and the elders had convened. Peter was, okay, I already read that. Go to John 18. Go back to John 18. 18 verse 19. The high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. So again, Jesus hasn't been charged with anything, and they're drilling him. They're asking him about his disciples. Jesus would have, any criminal, unless you're charged, you don't have to say anything about your friends. You don't have to say anything about the people you're with. You don't have to, he doesn't have to answer anything about his teaching. And that's why Jesus finally then calls them out. Stay in John 18. They're working really hard to just let Jesus set himself up. Verse 20. Here's what Jesus says. I have spoken openly to the world. Jesus answered him. I have always taught in the synagogue and in the temple where all the Jews congregate, and I haven't spoken anything in secret. He's like, why are you asking me this stuff? You guys know what I teach. And then he says, verse 21, why do you question me? Question those who heard what I told them. Look, they know what I said. So Jesus calls them out. He's like, what are you doing? You can't question me like this. And you can imagine Jesus going, you were there. You guys are sitting in the temple with me every day when I'm in there teaching. You know what I say. You know what I teach. So he doesn't, like I say, he doesn't have to answer any of this. And now at this point, you have to imagine the Jewish leaders are beginning to get a little bit fidgety, beginning to get a little bit embarrassed. Verse 22, when he had said these things, one of the officials standing by slapped Jesus, saying, is this the way you answer the high priest? Okay. So we're done at Annas, combine the people. Annas, at this point, the scene at Annas' home is ending. Because they're frustrated, it seems like. To slap someone that's a prisoner in front of everybody, just imagine if that happened today. The court would be adjourned, we'd have to start over, everything would be a mess. So you can see the frustrations beginning to boil for the Jewish leaders. So now it's on across, it seems like across the courtyard is all it would be, on to Caiaphas. And this is back where we get back to where Matthew is. Matthew, for whatever reason, just skips over the point the time in Annas'. Matthew 26, back there, verse 59 and 60. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin. So we've got, the whole Sanhedrin is how many people? 70. So there's 70 people and all the chief priests. So there's a huge crowd here assembled. I mean, I thought this was a pretty decent picture of showing this assemblage. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be Annas or Caiaphas. I didn't say really. But it says the whole Sanhedrin, and I don't know how yours reads, but look at verse 59. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false testimony. I mean, if you read this in the newspaper and Jim Bob's lawyers were looking for people to provide false testimony, you'd be like, wait, what is happening? I mean, that's like the most crazy thing I've ever heard. Against Jesus, so that they could put him to death. Just cut and dried. Here's what we're looking for. We want people to lie about Jesus so we can kill him, because we're done with this. But they could not find any, even though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 who came forward stated, "This man said, I can destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." Okay, so when they begin to call looking for false witnesses, what we have to understand here is Jesus is standing basically, I guess technically, he's standing before the jury. That's who these people are. They're supposed to be hearing this case, right? I mean, if you're called to jury duty, you don't get to stand up and go, "Your Honor, I'd like to ask the defendant a couple of questions." Start pacing back and forth like Perry Mason. That's not your role. That's what's happening here. These guys were supposed to be the jury. They're not the prosecutors. They're supposed to just be listening. They're not supposed to be looking for any kind of witnesses at all, much less literally trying to drum up false witnesses. And then the witnesses come forward. And these are sketchy witnesses. I mean, the witnesses are bad. I mean, it says they're looking for false witnesses. Mark 14:26 said the false witnesses couldn't even get their stories to agree. So, I mean, imagine, we think, and I want you to think a lot from Jesus' perspective, but now let's try and put yourself in the shoes of the chief priests and the Sanhedrin here. You're like, we got to kill this guy. Okay, all right, you got a couple of witnesses, bring him in. Well, I saw him one day and he was, told he was going to overthrow Rome. And the other guy goes, yeah, I remember he said he was going to overthrow the Jews. No, Rome. Yeah, Rome, yeah, that's what I meant. You're like, okay, get these guys out of here. So, I mean, you can imagine the tension level is just increasing for these guys even, because they can't even get their liars to lie right. I mean, these are people they've asked, come lie about Jesus. So I hope you see what's happening here. This is just, let's hurry and get to guilty. Let's go through the rigmarole. Let's act like we know what we're doing. Let's put on the show because we know we're getting to guilty. I mean, it's almost like we've got from point A to point B, we just got to fill in the gap with some stuff that looks legal because we know what we're doing. We know where this is going. So finally we get this claim. This one guy goes, yeah, what about his claim that he was going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days? Now this is interesting. We'll get there. When did that happen? When did Jesus make that claim in public? Sort of. He said he'd be raised again in 3 days. John 2. Okay, think about that. Let's look at John chapter 2. John chapter 2, that seems fairly early in John's gospel, doesn't it? John chapter 2, verse 15, this is scene 1 with the money changers. After making a whip of cords, he drove everyone out of the temple with their sheep and oxen. He also poured out the money changers' coins and overturned the tables. He told those who were selling doves, get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace. And his disciples remembered that it is written, zeal for your house will consume me. So the Jews replied, what sign will you show us for doing these things? Jesus answered, destroy this temple, and I will raise it up again in 3 days. Here's a good piece of trivia for you. This night, when somebody goes, hey, what about that time he said this? 3 years to the day prior. So this has been digging around in somebody's head. He said he was going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Nobody builds it in 3 days. Jehovah's Witnesses don't even build their building in 3 days. They didn't exist yet, but this is 3 years ago on Passover when this happens. And somebody drums that up and goes, hey, he said he was going to destroy the temple. Yeah, well, yeah. They
He didn't say he'd destroy the temple. He said he'd rebuild it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, and I think he's talking about his body. And they hear temple, they think capital T, the big building. Now, the reaction then. Finally, 2 came forward, back in Matthew 26, said, I can do this. The high priest stood up and said to him, don't you have an answer to what these men are testifying against you? But Jesus kept silent. Now, this to me is, Isaiah 53 verse 7, he spoke not a word. He remained silent through all of this. You think of the humanity we've seen of Jesus, the anguish in the garden, the struggle with his apostles, some of that. For him just to sit silently through this is just stunning to me. Jesus remains silent. Where'd it go? The high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. He says, okay, enough of this. I'm going to ask you one time. Are you claiming to be the Messiah? Are you claiming to be the Son of God? Jesus, verse 64, you have said it, Jesus told him. But I tell you, in the future, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Richard preached last Sunday about that phrase, the Son of Man. They knew what he meant. He says, yep. In fact, you just said it. So at this point, Caiaphas has what he wants. He just claimed to be the Son of God. He just said he was the Messiah. Now again, remember, the common Jewish mindset is Messiah means overthrow. Messiah means army. Messiah means David. Messiah means this whole picture that they have. Jesus just said, yes, that's who I am. Come on. And Caiaphas gets a little angry here. Let's just finish this out. Then the high priest tore his robes, and said, he has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? See, now you've heard the blasphemy. What is your decision? They said he deserves death. Okay, here's another little point of interest. When Mark's gospel, Mark records that Jesus just again answers with I am when he asks that question, by the way. But Caiaphas gets all dramatic and he tears his robes. What does that mean? Why is he doing that? It's a sign of grief, sign of rage. I just can't believe this is happening. And then he says, he has blasphemed. Now, Caiaphas is a high priest. He knows the law. He knows this verse. The priest who is highest among his brothers, who has had the anointing oil poured on his head and has been ordained to wear the clothes, must not dishevel his hair or tear his clothes. And he says he has blasphemed. He is totally disregarding the law. Totally, there's no respect for God's word. There's no respect for God's will. He knows. Because when it says he tears his robe, what's he tearing? He's not wearing his jammies. I mean, it's middle of the night, but he's probably wearing the priest's garment. And he tears it. That is blasphemy. That is, I mean, it says you're just not supposed to do that. That's a Levitical law. And he does it anyway because he wants to show how enraged he is. And I'm going to posit to you, he's not enraged. He just wants to put on a show. He might be enraged, but he's just enraged. He wants this guy dead. This guy has pushed it too far. And then we get to what is the predetermined verdict. What is your decision? They answered, he deserves death. That's not even the first jump that they should make. He deserves a trial. That's what he deserves. He deserves to at least, we've got to go through the process. But their predetermined verdict is he's guilty and he's going to die. Then they spat in his face and beat him. Others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, Messiah. Who is it that hit you? Because now it gets ugly. Because the Jews have made their decision. Annas to Caiaphas, the Jews have their ruling. And now they start to take out their rage. Which is, again, completely against Mosaic law. Because this is them beating Jesus. This is them spitting and slapping Jesus. And the point I want you to remember is, number one, they're ignoring everything Jesus has done. Because Jesus has said it. You guys know what I've taught. You guys know, you've seen what I do. Peter will say on the day of Pentecost, you guys witnessed the miracles Jesus did. There's people in that room who know what Jesus has done. And it's easy for us to look at them and go, how do they ignore that? Let's not ever ignore that. Let's not ever be like that and forget what Jesus has done. And put Jesus second place. Put Jesus kind of behind us because we don't want to think about Jesus right now and whatever point we are in life. It's easy to point the finger at them and say, how did they do that? And how did they treat Jesus this way? It is in the Hebrews writer who says that when we willfully sin, we crucify Jesus a second time. So when we think about what Jesus is going through here and what Peter says, when he was reviled, he did not revile in turn. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. Jesus takes all of this with dignity, with grace. But what we have to remember is through all of this, and I've said this 100 times, Jesus knew all of this and volunteered for it. Jesus knew all of this was coming and volunteered for it. For the Jews, like I said, for the Jewish portion of this, it's done. Now they've just got to go get Rome's permission, if you will. But what we're going to look at next week is something that's been going on in the background behind all of this, and we have to turn our focus again on poor Peter. Any thoughts? Okay, we'll start right there next week.